Story 1. The closed floor above Ward C, room 417. When the hospital assigned me to inventory the closed fourth floor, they described it as inactive storage space pending demolition. No one used the word abandoned. No one mentioned why it had been sealed in the first place. They just said it hadn't been operational for years and needed documentation. Before funding for renovation or demolition could be approved, it was routine work. At least that's what I told myself. The fourth floor sat directly above Ward C, a fully active recovery unit. Below, machines hummed steadily. Nurses walked the halls in soft rubber soles. Patients slept behind closed doors. But the elevator panel only listed floors 1 through 3 to reach the fourth. You needed a key card override and a physical switch hidden behind a small metal plate inside the control box. Someone had gone out of their way to make sure it wasn't accessed casually. The first time I took the stairwell instead of the elevator, I noticed the temperature shift halfway up. It wasn't dramatic. It's just enough that the air felt thinner, cooler, less circulated. The fluorescent lights above the stairwell buzzed inconsistently, flickering in brief pulses that made shadows jump along the concrete walls. When I reached the landing marked 4, the door didn't open immediately. I had to push harder than expected. The hallway beyond stretched longer than the floors below. Rows of identical patient rooms lined both sides. The floor tiles were intact, but dulled with a thin layer of dust. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, old and faded. Like something that had tried to keep the place clean, long after people stopped walking through it. It didn't feel chaotic. It felt paused. My instructions were straightforward. Catalog equipment, log remaining medical devices, photograph structural wear, nothing about patient records. Nothing about prior incidents. I walked slowly, noting room numbers as I passed. 401, 403, 405. Halfway down the hall, I saw room 417. Its door was slightly open. Every other door was fully closed. I assumed maintenance had left it that way years ago. Still, it stood out. I pushed it open fully. Inside, the room looked preserved. The hospital bed was neatly made, curtains drawn. A heart monitor sat unplugged beside the bed, its cord coiled carefully. No signs of vandalism, no obvious decay, just stillness. When I stepped back into the hallway and closed the door, I felt a small shift in air pressure behind me. Like something adjusting, I ignored it. 15 minutes later, as I returned from documenting a supply closet, I noticed 417's door was open again. Only a few inches, enough to notice. I checked the hinges. They were stable. No draft passed through the corridor. The windows were sealed from the outside. The HVAC system upstairs had been shut down years ago. Still, I shut the door again and moved on. Old buildings settle. What expands? Pressure changes happen. On my third shift, I heard a faint electronic chirp echo down the hallway, short, flat. It took me a second to recognize it. A monitor beep. The kind that signals disconnection or flatline. The sound had come from 417. Inside, the heart monitor remained unplugged. But as I stepped closer, the screen flickered briefly. Green static crawled across the dark display, then vanished. No power source, no battery connected. Yet I had seen it activate. That night, I stayed longer than usual. At exactly 7:40 p.m., the hallway lights dimmed briefly. Just a flicker. When they stabilized, every door on the left side of the corridor stood open, perfectly aligned, as though someone had walked down the hall, pulling each one back carefully. The dust patterns inside the rooms were undisturbed. No footprints, no drag marks, just open doors. I closed them, one by one. When I reached 417, the air inside felt heavier than before, warmer, occupied. I began noticing subtle things after that. Curtains in random rooms would be partially drawn when I arrived. Beds slightly indented at the center. Not enough to suggest someone lying down. It's just enough to imply weight. The footsteps started on my fifth shift, soft, measured, walking slowly behind me as I documented inventory. Each time I turned, the corridor was empty, but the sound always stopped the moment I faced it. I tested it. I stood still in the center of the hall and closed my eyes. The footsteps resumed, slow, intentional. They stopped just a few feet behind me. When I turned, nothing stood there. but the dust near 417 had shifted slightly. The hospital database listed the 4th floor as administratively vacated. No major incidents recorded. No documented patient deaths specific to that wing. It was simply closed. That absence of explanation made everything worse. There was no reason for anything to remain. One evening, I heard the distinct roll of wheels along tile. A gurney, slow, controlled. It passed the nurse's station halfway down the hall, stopped at 417. I didn't move this time. The sound lingered for several seconds, then faded. The next day, the hospital bracelet appeared. Lying on the floor outside 417, the name had faded beyond recognition, but the room number was printed clearly. 417. The plastic clasp was intact, as if it had been removed carefully. By the 10th shift, 417's door no longer opened slightly. It stood fully open when I arrived. The bed inside was no longer perfectly made. The blanket folded back halfway, the pillow slightly indented, like someone had risen from it moments earlier. At 7:40 p.m., I positioned myself inside 417 deliberately. I wanted to witness it directly. The air thickened gradually. The monitor screen flickered again, longer this time. Green lines traced faintly across the display and flattened. A voice spoke, not loud, not whispering, just present. Still here. The words weren't threatening. They sounded patient, like someone waiting for acknowledgement. The door behind me closed gently. No slam, just a quiet click. The temperature rose noticeably. The mattress dipped beside me, subtle, controlled. In the dark reflection of the monitor screen, I saw it. A faint outline sitting on the bed, human-shaped, not fully formed, but solid enough to reflect. Facing forward, the outline turned its head slowly toward me. The room felt smaller, the air pressure shifted, pressing lightly against my ears. I heard a shallow breath that wasn't mine. "Still here," it repeated. The hallway lights outside flickered rapidly. Doors along the corridor creaked open in sequence, one after another, not slammed, opened, as if welcoming someone back. The outline leaned slightly forward. The blanket adjusted around it. The monitor beeped again, short, controlled, matching the rhythm of a steady pulse. I forced myself to speak. Why? The air stirred faintly against my arm. Not cold, not warm, just movement. The outline remained seated, unmoving. Gradually, the figure began to fade, not vanishing instantly, just thinning, like condensation, evaporating. The mattress slowly rose back to level. The monitor screen went dark. When I stepped into the hallway, every door was closed again. Dust lay undisturbed across the tiles. The temperature normalized. The floor felt empty, except for 417. Its door remained open. The hospital postponed demolition indefinitely. Budget issues, they said. Administrative delays. I still conduct inventory on the 4th floor, but I no longer close room 417. I leave it open, because every evening at 7:40 p.m., the monitor flickers. The blanket shifts slightly, and a voice confirms what the records never did. Someone is still here. On a floor officially vacated, above patients who sleep peacefully below, unaware that the ward above them was never cleared, only sealed. Story 2, Unit 12, B, never stayed still. I didn't believe in poltergeist. I believed in faulty wiring, pressure shifts, aging infrastructure, and overworked imaginations. That was before I took the temporary contract inside. Control Unit 12, B, an underground rail operations office that had been officially decommissioned 5 years earlier. They told me it just needed structural assessment. They didn't tell me why no one else wanted to go back down there. Unit 1 to be sat beneath an inactive subway spur that had been sealed after rerouting construction. The main station above still operated normally. Passengers had no idea there was an entire abandoned control floor below their feet. To reach it, I had to pass through a maintenance hatch behind a locked electrical room. The air changed immediately when I descended the metal stairs. Still, dense, pressurized. The control room itself was circular. Rows of darkened monitors lined the curved walls. Central console sat in the middle, surrounded by rolling office chairs. Dust coated everything evenly. No signs of forced entry. No vandalism. Just abandonment. My job was simple. Photograph equipment, document salvageable components, confirm structural stability. The first hour was uneventful. Then I heard a chair roll behind me. Soft, slow, controlled. I turned. One of the office chairs near the east console had shifted slightly away from its desk. Not dramatically, just enough that I knew it hadn't been like that earlier. I checked the floor level. No slope, no airflow strong enough to move a wheeled chair. I pushed it back into place and continued working. 10 minutes later, it rolled again. This time farther, the wheels moved smoothly, deliberately, until it stopped facing the central console. It's not random. Directed. I told myself vibrations from trains above could explain it, but this spur line had been disconnected. No active rail above 1B. Only empty tunnel. The building didn't shake. There were no tremors, just that chair repositioning itself. The next day, more subtle changes appeared. Binders on shelves leaned slightly outward. Loose papers that I had stacked neatly were now fanned across the desk. It's not thrown, arranged, like someone had examined them. The third shift, I heard tapping. 3 knocks against metal. Pause. 3 knocks again. The sound came from beneath the central console. I crouched down, nothing under it except wiring and old cable housing. The knocking stopped when I got too close. I began documenting everything with timestamps. 1:14 p.m., chair repositioned. 1:37 p.m., stack of papers displaced. 2:02 p.m., metallic tapping under console. Patterns matter in structural diagnostics. Patterns matter in hauntings too, I would later realize. On my 4th visit, the main door behind me shut, not slammed, just pulled closed with steady force. I hadn't latched it. There was no draft strong enough to move it. The air down there felt sealed, stagnant, still. When I reopened the door, the temperature inside the room had risen slightly. Not enough to be uncomfortable, but noticeable. The monitors along the walls flickered faintly. Just a brief pulse of static. None of them were connected to power. The activity escalated gradually. Chairs rotated slowly while I wasn't looking. File drawers slid open halfway. Not violently, just enough to draw attention. Each time I corrected the displacement, something else moved, as if it were responding. I decided to test it. I placed a single pen in the center of the main desk, perfectly aligned. I stepped back and watched. Nothing happened for several minutes. Then the pen rolled. Not off the desk, across it, stopping at the edge closest to the central console. The air pressure shifted. My ears popped slightly like descending in an elevator. A binder slid from a shelf behind me and landed upright on the floor. It didn't fall flat, stood there, balanced. I felt it then, not a presence, like in ghost stories. Not a figure in the corner, but an agitation in the room, at an energy that didn't feel mournful. It felt restless, unsettled. The knocking returned. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. This time from inside a locked equipment cabinet. I unlocked it slowly. Nothing inside had shifted. But the moment I closed it again, the tapping resumed. On my 7th shift, the chairs formed a semicircle around the central console when I arrived. Hadn't left them that way. They faced inward, toward the middle, as if waiting for instruction. I felt watched, not by eyes, but by motion. The air around me seemed to anticipate where I would move next. File drawers opened just before I reached them. Monitors flickered seconds before I looked their direction. It was learning my patterns. The first object thrown wasn't violent. A loose bolt rolled off a shelf and landed near my foot. Not at me, near me. Intentional placement, testing proximity. The second time, a clipboard slid off a desk and struck the floor beside me. Closer, still controlled, not chaotic rage, measured escalation. I spoke aloud without thinking. "Do you want me here?" The lights flickered immediately. 3 taps echoed from beneath the console. The nearest chair rolled forward 6 inches. The air pressure spiked sharply. Loose papers lifted briefly before settling again. The semicircle of chairs tightened, inching closer toward the center. One by one, wheels turning without visible force. The monitors activated simultaneously. Static filled every screen, white noise without sound. Just visual interference crawling across dark glass. The room felt smaller, compressed. The central console drawer slid open. Inside, I found an old shift log. The final entry dated the day the unit was decommissioned. The handwriting grew erratic toward the bottom. System interference escalating. Equipment moving without input. Then the writing stopped mid-sentence. The chairs began to move again, this time faster. Rolling in a tight circle around the console, not striking me, just orbiting. The air grew warmer, heavy, charged. Metallic objects rattled inside drawers. The knocking accelerated. 3 taps became continuous. The cabinet doors trembled, but did not break. Nothing shattered. Thing exploded, just controlled, intelligent motion. The clipboard lifted from the floor, hovered briefly at chest height, then dropped gently back down. Not thrown, placed, like a demonstration. I stepped backward toward the exit. The door opened for me before I reached it. Every chair stopped moving simultaneously. The monitors went dark. The knocking ceased. The room returned to stillness. The contract ended 2 days later. The city postponed demolition of Unit 1 to B. Officially, the reason was funding delays. Unofficially, maintenance crews reported unpredictable equipment shifts. The unit remained sealed beneath the active station. Passengers walk overhead every day, unaware that below them, chairs still reposition themselves. Drawers open without touch. And something restless continues, rearranging a room that refuses to stay still. Story 3. The greenhouse that didn't need sunlight. The greenhouse complex had been shut down for 8 years when I was hired to evaluate it. It wasn't abandoned in the traditional sense. The property was fenced, the cameras still worked, and the main office even had electricity. But the greenhouse domes themselves, they were sealed. Nobody had set foot inside since the research funding was pulled 8 years ago. At least that's what I was told. The facility sat on the edge of farmland, miles outside the nearest town. From a distance, the glass domes looked intact, a little fogged, but structurally sound. It was only when I got up close that I saw the glass panels were clouded from the inside. It's not with dust, but with condensation, as if something in there was still generating humidity. My job was straightforward, structural assessment. I needed to check for rot, mold, corrosion, the usual stuff. The goal was to determine if demolition was the only option, or if the place could be retrofitted. The property manager handed me a ring of keys and a map. When I asked why the domes were sealed instead of just dismantled, he wouldn't look me in the eye. All he said was, "They tried." That was it. The first dome opened with a fight. The metal latch screeched as I heaved it open. A wave of warm, damp air washed over me. It was far too warm for an unpowered structure. The smell wasn't what I expected. It wasn't decay or mildew. It was the scent of life, of growth. Wet soil, fresh leaves, something incredibly vital. Sunlight struggled to filter through the fogged glass, casting the interior in a hazy green light. The dome was choked with overgrown vines and strange tall plants I didn't recognize. These weren't just wild weeds that had taken over. It looked like cultivated species, or at least they had been. The old irrigation pipes lay disconnected along the floor, yet the soil beneath the tangled growth was visibly moist. I knelt down, pressing my fingers into the dirt. It was warm, not just sun-warmed, but warm from beneath. It felt like a slow, faint pulse. I stood up quickly, brushing the soil from my hands, telling myself it was just my imagination. The air inside was unnaturally still. No wind, no insects buzzing, not even the chirp of a bird, just the heavy humidity pressing gently against my skin. The plants didn't sway. They stood perfectly rigid, almost as if they were waiting for something. Halfway through the dome, I noticed something truly strange. Every single plant was facing inward, not toward the sun, which would be normal. They were all oriented toward the exact center of the structure. Their leaves were angled in the same direction, a deliberate, uniform alignment. At the center, the soil was darker, richer. It formed a circular patch about 6 feet across. There wasn't one distinct plant growing there, just a low, dense carpet of thick foliage. The air felt warmer right above that spot, heavier. That's when I heard it. A soft, shifting sound in the leaves behind me. I spun around. Nothing. But the leaves of the plant I had brushed past just moments before were no longer angled outward. They had turned. They were facing me. I tried to rationalize it. Plants react to changes in light, to body heat, to vibrations, but there was no breeze, no sudden shift in the sunlight. Yet, as I took a step forward, the stalks of the surrounding plants adjusted, subtly tracking my movement. I decided to test it. I walked the perimeter of the dome, and every time I changed position, the leaves nearest me pivoted slightly. It wasn't a violent snap, but a slow, controlled, responsive turn. The second dome was even worse. When I managed to get the door open, the humidity hit me like a physical thing. The condensation on the glass inside wasn't just fog. It had formed intricate patterns that looked exactly like veins, branching out across every single panel. It looked disturbingly organic. The plants in this dome were taller, with thicker stems and broader, darker leaves. And just like in the first dome, every single one of them was angled toward the center, where another circular patch of dark, rich soil waited. The ground vibrated faintly under my boots. It wasn't a tremor. It was more like a slow internal shift, as if something massive beneath the soil was adjusting its weight. I knelt down carefully. The soil at the center seemed to be breathing, a barely perceptible rise and fall. I scrambled back, and the leaves of the closest plant twitched. Just once, a ripple of movement shot through the greenery, then stillness again. That night, I dug through the old research notes left behind in the office. The project had focused on accelerated plant growth in low-light environments, alternative nutrient cycling, and creating a closed-system ecosystem. One entry, scribbled near the end of the project's timeline, caught my eye. Unexpected root network expansion beyond predicted containment. The next day, I went back armed with thermal equipment. Just as I suspected, the central soil patches in both domes registered significantly warmer than the surrounding areas. But the blueprints showed no underground heating system, no power cables routed beneath the domes. I decided I had to know what was down there. I took a long metal probe and pushed it into the central patch of soil. It met resistance almost immediately. It wasn't rock, and it wasn't wood. It was something fibrous, dense, and interwoven. The probe began to vibrate slightly in my hand. Then, it shifted sideways, pulled by an unseen force. Not sharply, but with a definite tension, as if something below had gripped it. I let go instantly. The soil settled. And then, in perfect unison, the plants nearest the center leaned toward me. Not a full bend, but a distinct incline. They were attentive. The air grew thicker, harder to breathe. I started backing toward the exit, my eyes locked on the plants. The leaves along my path adjusted again, angling inward as I moved, closing the visual space behind me. It wasn't trapping me, but it was narrowing my world. The third dome was the last one. As soon as I stepped inside, I saw the alignment was already complete. Every plant was already facing the central patch. No adjustment necessary. It was as if it had been expecting me all along. The soil there was darker than in the other domes, almost black. The surface rippled slightly as I stepped closer. Not a dramatic wave, but a slow, deliberate undulation, like something huge shifting beneath a blanket of dirt. The air temperature spiked. The surrounding plants began to lean inward more aggressively, their leaves forming a loose enclosure around the center around me. And that's when I felt it. It wasn't a presence, not a ghost. It was an awareness. Something vast and alive beneath the soil was registering my proximity. The warmth intensified. The ground bulged slightly, and a thick, pale-veined root surfaced for just a moment. It moved with slow intention. Curling once around the metal probe I had dropped earlier before withdrawing back beneath the soil, the leaves around me shifted closer, their edges overlapping, reducing the open space. I stepped backward, slowly and carefully. The plants adjusted again, maintaining their distance, but holding their formation. They were watching. When I finally made it out of the dome and sealed the door, the interior stilled immediately. The leaves returned to their neutral angle. The soil flattened. The warmth diminished. From the outside, it once again looked like an ordinary, overgrown greenhouse. My demolition recommendation was denied. The official reason cited was structural salvage potential. Unofficially, the board requested indefinite monitoring. The domes remained sealed. No sunlight can effectively filter through the dense fog on the glass. The irrigation systems are dead, yet satellite imagery shows the vegetation inside continues to thicken. It's growing, spreading, and always facing inward, arranged around something beneath the soil that doesn't require light. It only requires space. Story 4. The last train to Platform 9. Platform 9 was never demolished. It was simply removed from the schedule. The coastal terminal still operated daily commuters, tourists, freight transfers, but one narrow extension at the far end of the station had been fenced off 8 years ago after structural concerns were reported. That's what the public was told. I was hired to inspect the sublevel support beams beneath that closed platform. Temporary contract. 3 nights, after hours only. The main terminal shut down at 11:45 p.m. by midnight. The halls were empty except for security and cleaning crews. Platform 9 sat beyond a locked service gate marked restricted access. The paint was chipped. The signage faded. But the tracks beyond it were still intact. No train had used them in years. The first night I unlocked the gate and stepped through. The air changed immediately. The active platform smelled of oil, metal, and sea air drifting in from the coast. Platform 9 smelled stale. Not rotting, just sealed, like air that hadn't circulated properly in a long time. The lights above the platform were dimmer than the rest of the station. Half of them flickered intermittently. The departure board at the far end remained mounted to the wall, powered off. Dust coated the benches evenly. No footprints, no signs of trespassers. My assignment required accessing the maintenance hatch beneath the platform. To reach it, I had to walk the full length of the trackside. As I moved, the sound of my boots echoed sharply against the tile. Too sharply. The acoustics felt exaggerated, as if the space amplified everything. Halfway down the platform, I heard a faint metallic hum. Low. Steady. The kind of vibration you'd expect before a train arrives. I froze. There was no active rail connected to Platform 9 anymore. The line had been rerouted. The hum stopped the moment I focused on it. The silence afterward felt heavier, dense. I resumed walking, telling myself old wiring can retain charge. Metal can resonate. But the rails beneath me felt cool and active. When I reached the departure board, I noticed something unsettling. A faint glow pulsed briefly across the blank screen, just a flicker. Then darkness again. No power source was connected. The wiring panel below it had been stripped years earlier, so the maintenance hatch beneath the platform opened easily. The support beams showed minor corrosion, but nothing alarming. I documented measurements, took photos, logged notes. For nearly an hour, nothing unusual happened. Then I heard it again, the hum, closer this time. It wasn't just a hum. It was the distant rhythm of steel wheels on track. Faint, approaching. My body reacted before my logic did. I climbed back up onto the platform. The sound intensified. There was no train visible down the dark tunnel, no headlights, no wind displacement. Yet the sound continued, building gradually, slow, controlled arrival, like something pulling into the station on schedule. The overhead lights flickered in sequence, one by one, starting at the far end of the platform and moving toward me. The metallic vibration deepened. The air pressure shifted slightly, pressing against my ears. Then the sound stopped abruptly. Silence returned so quickly it felt unnatural. The lights stabilized. The rails lay empty. No train, no movement. But the departure board flickered again. This time text appeared. Just for a second, arrival 12:17 a.m., then it vanished. Current time was 12:16. I stepped back slowly. At exactly 12:17, the hum resumed, louder than before, the sound of brakes engaging. The soft hydraulic exhale of a train coming to a halt. The wind of displacement brushed against my jacket. The space in front of me felt occupied. The air distorted faintly, like heat waves rising from pavement. An outline formed along the track. Not solid, but structured. The faint suggestion of train windows, doors, metal frame. The platform lights reflected off nothing, yet I could sense its presence. The sound of doors sliding open echoed sharply. No physical door moved, but the mechanism was clear. An arrival. Footsteps followed, soft, measured, disembarking. They echoed across the tile beside me. I couldn't see anyone, but I felt the space shift as if people were walking past. One stopped directly in front of me. The air grew colder, not freezing. Just enough to register. Faint pressure settled at eye level, like someone standing inches away. Waiting. I heard a breath. Shallow. Calm. Then the faint rustle of fabric. The outline of a figure flickered briefly in front of me. Transparent, indistinct. Facing the departure board. The board illuminated again. Departure 12:22 a.m. The figure turned slowly toward the train outline. More shapes appeared along the platform. Passengers waiting. None fully formed. All present. At 12:22, the doors slid closed. The hum resumed. The train began to depart. The shapes stepped forward and vanished into the distortion along the tracks. One remained behind, standing near the edge. This final figure faced me directly, its outline clearer than the others, not detailed, but human, still, watching. The hum faded as the invisible train departed into darkness. The remaining figure did not move. The lights above us flickered softly. The air felt suspended, paused. I heard the faintest whisper, not a word, more like a distant announcement distorted by old speakers. The figure's outline flickered slightly, then solidified briefly enough that I could see a coat. Hat features blurred. It stepped closer. Temperature dropped sharply. The sensation wasn't threatening. It felt unfinished. It's like something waiting for acknowledgement. Without thinking, I spoke. "You missed it." The figure tilted its head slightly. The departure board remained blank. The silence stretched. Then the board flickered one final time. Next arrival 12:17 a.m., the figure began to fade. Not abruptly, just gradually dissolving into the dim platform air. The lights stabilized fully. The air returned to normal temperature. The rails were silent, the platform empty. Dust undisturbed, as if nothing had occurred. The official report cited minor corrosion but no structural urgency. Platform 9 remained sealed. Security cameras reportedly malfunctioned between 12:16 and 12:23 a.m. every night. Maintenance logs occasionally note unexplained audio interference during that window. The station continues operating without incident. Passengers board their scheduled trains unaware that one platform still follows a timetable that was never canceled. A train that arrives, disembarks, departs, every night. On tracks that were officially shut down years ago. Story 5. The storage wing never stayed organized. The museum's public galleries were pristine, climate-controlled, quiet, carefully curated. But the archival storage wing behind the main building had been closed for nearly a decade after budget cuts reduced staff. The collection inside hadn't been transferred. It had simply been sealed. I was hired to assess whether the annex could be reopened for limited tours. The storage wing sat connected to the main museum by a narrow service corridor. Visitors never saw it. Thick fire doors separated it from the public exhibits. When I unlocked the annex for the first time, the air that escaped felt stale but controlled. The climate systems were still minimally active. Preservation mattered, even if the space didn't. Metal shelving units stretched in long rows under fluorescent lighting. Crates labeled with accession numbers stacked neatly. Sculptures wrapped in foam. Paintings secured in vertical racks. Everything appeared orderly, documented, cataloged. Still, my job was to verify inventory accuracy and assess spatial reconfiguration. The first hour passed without issue. Then I heard a soft scrape behind me. I turned. A wooden crate had shifted several inches out from its shelf. Not fallen, just repositioned. I checked the floor. Flat concrete. No vibration, no incline. I pushed the crate back, flush with the metal frame, and continued logging numbers. 5 minutes later, it slid forward again. Same distance. Exact alignment. I marked it as potential structural imbalance. But as I moved deeper into the rows, more subtle changes emerged. A wrapped sculpture that had faced inward now angled slightly toward the aisle. A painting rack swayed faintly, despite no airflow. The room felt attentive. On the second shift, I decided to test the space. I placed a measuring tape on the central table and positioned it precisely at 12 inches extended. No slack. perfect alignment. I stepped back and waited. For several minutes, nothing happened, and the tape retracted halfway, not snapped back, not violently. It slid inward slowly, stopping at 6 inches. Even, deliberate. The overhead lights flickered briefly. When they stabilized, 3 crates along the left row had rotated slightly on their shelves, each angled outward at the same degree, as if turned by careful hands. I began noticing a pattern. Objects weren't thrown, they weren't broken. They were rearranged, curated differently. It's like someone disagreeing with the museum's original organization. In the sculpture section, a bronze bust had shifted forward to the edge of its pedestal, facing the aisle directly. It hadn't fallen, it hadn't tilted, it had been moved into prominence. The air pressure changed subtly whenever something shifted. My ears would pop faintly. The climate system logs showed no fluctuation. Temperature remained stable, humidity unchanged. Yet the environment felt reactive. I heard rolling metal wheels from deeper in the annex. A cart. One used to transport heavy artifacts. I followed the sound carefully. The cart stood in the center of the aisle, empty. When I stepped closer, it rolled backward several feet. On its own, not fast, not erratic, controlled movement. It stopped exactly beside a shelf labeled uncatalogued. That label hadn't been there the day before. I checked my photographs. Shelf had been blank. Inside the shelf sat a small ceramic vessel. No accession tag. No documentation number. It looked recently placed. I hadn't logged it. It hadn't been there before. When I lifted the vessel, a nearby crate slid off its shelf and landed upright beside me. Not smashed. Not cracked. Placed. A counteraction. The rearrangements increased in frequency. Shelves shifted inches closer together overnight. Paintings reordered by size rather than era. Sculptures repositioned by material. The annex wasn't becoming chaotic. It was becoming organized differently, intentionally. On the 4th night, I arrived to find the central aisle completely cleared. All crates that had previously occupied it were stacked neatly along the walls. A straight pathway extended to the far end of the wing, like a guided route. I walked down the newly formed corridor. The overhead lights flickered in sequence as I moved. Cart rolled behind me at a steady pace, maintaining distance, following. At the far end of the annex stood a large, covered installation piece. It had been marked restoration pending in old records. The cloth covering it shifted slightly, not lifting, just adjusting. The surrounding crates rotated to face it. Every sculpture in nearby rows angled toward that covered structure. The room felt concentrated, focused, like an audience waiting for something to be revealed. I reached for the cloth. Before I touched it, a shelf behind me rattled sharply, not violently, but with emphasis. A warning. The cart rolled forward until it blocked my path. The overhead lights dimmed briefly. The air pressure increased noticeably. A row of paintings slid forward simultaneously. Perfect alignment. Edges flush, centered. The covered structure shifted beneath the fabric. A subtle internal movement. The cloth tightened across its shape, then relaxed. The surrounding objects adjusted again, closing in slightly. The ceramic vessel I had removed earlier rolled gently across the floor, toward the installation. It stopped at its base, placed like an offering. The climate control system hummed louder. The lights flickered more rapidly. Metal shelving units vibrated but did not collapse. No destruction, just rearrangement. Refinement. I stepped backward slowly. The cart moved with me, mirroring distance. The cleared central aisle narrowed as crates shifted inward inch by inch, not trapping, guiding. The cloth over the installation lifted slightly at one corner, just enough for me to see bronze beneath. A large sculptural piece, human-shaped, arms extended outward, uncatalogued. The shelves along the annex snapped into perfect alignment, symmetrical rows, equal spacing. Objects evenly distributed by size and height. The room stilled completely. The cart rolled back to its original position. The museum board decided not to reopen the storage wing to the public. Officially, the annex required further archival review. Unofficially, staff reported objects shifting between inspections. Nothing damaged, nothing broken, just reorganized overnight. The annex remained sealed, Catalog numbers still change positions in the database without input. And somewhere in the dark rows of shelving, something continues curating the collection. Not with chaos, but with purpose. Thanks for watching. If you found the stories as unsettling as I did, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more strange explorations. See you next time.